Do we share a microphone? Welcome. Well, sit and let's get started. We have a lot of ground to cover and not much time, so let me just ask each of you to just very briefly introduce yourself and just take a minute to explain what your company does. Lubomila, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Chris. My name is Lubomila. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Plan A. In Plan A, we use complex data processing capabilities to enable corporates to understand their carbon footprint. And based on the worst performing indicators, we then explain to them how they can get to net zero by using machine learning and a lot of science. Last year, in the beginning of COVID, we also kicked off a community called the Green Tech Alliance. This is now a consortium of more than 1,000 companies, all startups, scale-ups, addressing different challenges related to climate change. And the main purpose of the community is for green tech companies to get access to capital, visibility, and expertise for free. And actually, it's really amazing to be also at this event because a bunch of the speakers today are part of this advisory board, like Barbara, Amy, that is going to be speaking a bit later from Sifted, which is kind of the type of people that we have supporting the startups.
Cindy?
Thank you. So I'm Cindy Demichel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of geoenergy, and I'm geologist by background. And what we're doing with our company is actually connecting. We're talked about space, but I'm going to talk about Earth, and we saw that this is very linked. We are connecting the buildings to the energy of the Earth so that we can provide low carbon heat and sustainable cooling. So we're dividing by 10 the CO2 emissions of the heating compared to gas, right? And we're sustainable cooling because we're not rejecting the summer heat in our cities, contributing to the heat islands in our cities, but we are storing that heat, the summer heat, to the ground to reuse it in the winter. So we really are a industrial startup, so we are making holes and connecting those buildings to the energy of the Earth.
Great. Aude?
Yes, hello, and I'm Aude. I'm co-founder of InnovaFeed. We're also industrial startup, tech and industrial. We develop actually vertical farming technologies to produce insect-based nutrients for animal and plant nutrition. So basically we use insect to feed chicken, fish, poultry, and the reason we do that is because compared to the existing ingredients, insect nutrient has the highest quality. And compared to the most sustainable ingredients today, we can divide by 2 the carbon footprint. So I have a background in engineering and consulting, strategy consulting. I founded the company in 2016 with 3 partners, and today we're over, I think, 200 people working on the project with 2 vertical farms, so plants in the north of France in operation.
Amazing. And suddenly that's become a very hot industry in France in the last few months. I'm not even sure why that particular, why France and why now, but that's probably a whole other panel for us to explore. Well, again, thank you all for being here. One thing I want to start by talking about, it strikes me whenever I talk to people about who are doing things in generally the sphere of impact-related startups, whether it's climate or social justice or something developing food systems, these problems seem so massive and overwhelming. And I hear a lot people sitting in their home thinking, well, yes, I think climate change is a problem. What could I do about it, really? I mean, how could I solve climate change? Each of you, in your way, has sort of overcome that barrier. You've decided you can do something to affect this. You can improve the situation. So, Lubomila, I'll start with you. How did you sort of overcome that barrier and just simply believe not just, hey, climate change is a problem, but I can do something about this?
My climate change journey started in 2016 when essentially I found myself on a beach in Morocco collecting plastic instead of surfing on a holiday. And I, at that point, was not doing anything related to climate change. I wasn't even understanding it as something that was part of my daily impact I had to take care of. I went back to London after this trip, went back to my job, which was a wonderful fintech job where I was working in a startup that was exploding, and felt a little void that basically made me feel like for close to a year that I needed to educate myself. I was spending a lot of my free time just learning about climate change. I built a data model that was looking on one hand at the worst performing environmental indicators and then at how much money was going into addressing those. No positive correlation whatsoever. Then I interviewed a bunch of people, and basically by the time I finished with all of these experiments, there was quite a lot of evidence for me that we had a flawed economic system. We essentially were looking into incentivizing things that were going to lead to profits that actually were not looking into the true cost and what was ahead of us in terms of negative repercussions and unintended, unexpected capex. And with this learning, we went on a journey to essentially explain to businesses how they can become more clear with their impact on the planet, but more from the economic perspective of where they're losing money along the way. Because I think one of the biggest and most flawed arguments related to sustainability is that it's something expensive. The truth is that already we're paying 151% higher costs for climate-related risks only over the last 10 years. And that's increasing probably after this year exponentially just because of what we've seen only in Europe itself. So essentially, when you learn all these things, you can't unlearn them. You're sitting on a lot of knowledge, you're sitting on a lot of kind of traditional type of conclusions that maybe have been penetrated in your mind through the educational system that I'm incredibly grateful for. But adding this layer of knowledge about climate change also gave me practical understanding that we're not going to be able to pay for what's ahead of us because it's not calculated for at the moment. So that kind of made me determined that probably this truth needs to get to others as well.
And that led to you to a very specific idea then that you felt, okay, I can grasp this, I can pursue this and actually do something about this piece of it.
As many, I'm sure, in the audience know, building a startup is not a one idea that actually becomes reality. So there's definitely a few pivotal moments that pivoted the initial idea. At first, we thought that we were going to use science to explain to people where they should put money to support environmental projects and basically define CSR strategies through science. Turn out people make donations based on emotions, so that was not going to work. So essentially, we kind of tested a few things, but ultimately ended up to the model where we are today.
And Cindy, I know you had a very specific type of journey in your case. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how the entrepreneurship element?
Sure. And I think this is exactly what you said, right? It all started with individual experience, right? I started like the zero waste journey, then the low carbon food journey, and etc. on individual, initiative. And then at some point it was like, okay, in my job, what can I do? And I came from the energy world, the fossil world, oil and gas industry. And together with my two co-founders, we were like, okay, there is so many expertise in-house, and expertise, technology expertise, mindset, industrial, global rollout mindset, that we were sure there was something that we could do. And so really the idea was, let's find a technology and a business model that could be applied, that we could sell to our company, because there was two choices. Either we would jump out of the company and do our own journey, or we take the chance of having that big boat with all the means, all the technology and etc. And we try to shift a little bit the journey of that boat. And this is what we call internally the wild entrepreneurship, because there was no entrepreneurship program. But we managed to convince that industry, that company that has this pioneer mindset to reuse this industrial expertise and technology in a low carbon world with different customers, different industry. We're now in the building industry, different business models, and that is the journey really. So that really is let's leverage on what exists. Let's take the best out of the few words that we know and try to make something and to maximize the impact. That was really our red line, or our objective: maximize the impact. How can we do? We need a good idea is not enough. I think we all agree with that, but we need to have people supporting that, and we found those people in our company in Schlumberger actually, and to support that journey towards a low carbon with maximize the impact.
Great. And Aude, for you, I mean, to me it sounds so massive and overwhelming to think about. It's one thing if you're sitting on a laptop in a conference room writing a mobile app, and another to imagine a whole industrial startup, building the customers, the business, the idea, but factories and all these things. So is that what you saw at the beginning, or did that also evolve, and how did you kind of overcome the different hurdles to kind of realize the whole operation?
Yeah, well, it started with slides actually, and being consultant, I mean, we looked at the macro trends. Me and my partners were very much involved in development issues. So I worked a lot on education. One of my partners worked a lot on agriculture development. So we see all those trends. We see basically how do you feed more and more people, growing population, with better food, while drastically, reducing carbon footprint. It seems so massive. And at that time, it made a lot of sense to think about alternative protein, alternative nutrient, which is a macro trend. There's a lot of things going on. And it made a lot of sense for us to think about animal nutrition, because animal nutrition actually accounts for animal feeds is half of the crop. So half of agriculture is really dedicated to feeding animals. So finding alternative sources, better quality, much more sustainable sources of nutrient would have a significant impact on our food system. And so we started with slides, and then we thought animal nutrition made a lot of sense. Insects made a lot of sense. It's a great solution to that because it's highly nutritious, require very little resource to grow. We discussed with a bunch of people in the industry, and everybody was like, yes, well, that's the natural diet of chicken, fish, poultry, And the only thing that was missing is we don't know how to produce that in large scale. And so that became more and more concrete for us. And we thought, okay, well, the piece that is missing is technology and operating model. So let's try to rear insect, let's try to grow it, and see what it takes to go into production. So we didn't really think this as, wow, this is a massive project, etc. We just thought step by step, there's a concept that works, there's a fundamental element in nature's food chain that we underexploit in our society, and we need technology to produce it. So let's make the technology. We leverage a lot of vertical farming technologies, data analytics, and we have to make it more sustainable. So let's do an operating model where we will optimize energy use. We use essentially fatal energy, so we connect our plants to renewable energy centers, and we use actually what goes out of the chimney. So we use only waste energies, and step by step we made things happen. And as you said, in France we have a lot of momentum in that area, which is I don't know how to explain it, but it happens that Yeah,
we've become the insect capital, food capital of the world somehow.
And I think that also gave a lot of energy to what we're doing, So and today we are in industry and we're proud of it. There's a lot of players going in every year in that field.
I'm going to start a Michelin guide for that. But let's just stay with you for a second then. The other element for all of these, and as we heard in the previous panel, is a question of actually building these things into a business. You want to do good, you want to explore, that's great. It's very uplifting and inspiring, but at the end of the day, it has to become a sustainable business. It sounds like from what you're describing, that kind of evolved with your thinking, but I'm also wondering then, you've been successful at raising money to realize this project. How difficult was that to do in terms of explaining this vision to venture capitalists, and has that changed over time in terms of their embrace of the idea that there can be legitimate businesses around climate change?
I think there's 2 points in your question, is how to make things concrete and actually making things concrete helps venture capitalists then to realize also the real impact what you're doing. We started, actually, it was a question for us at the beginning, before being a question for the venture capitalist. Are we able to manage a profitable and sustainable business in the midterm, you know? And actually, week 2 of our project, we started building a very detailed economic model of the production costs. We had no idea how to rear insect at the moment, and nobody had any idea, you know. But making that model very hypothesis-driven, it forced us to really think about our business in terms of concretely what we needed to build, you know. How do you feed insects? Where do you put them, you know, in kind of trays? How many trays? Well, there's a lot of trays, you know, how many kilos of food I put in it, etc., etc. And that was very useful because week 2, it was clear for us what were the key challenges we had, what were the key hypotheses we had to test, who to talk with, you know, and start make things rolling and build concrete steps. And that is exactly the same thing we took to the venture capitalists then, you know, and showing them, okay, a factory will be this space, those kind of boxes, those numbers, this is the capex, this is the energy, you know, and making things concrete actually helped a lot for them not to only to think this as a future technology, but actually as a very concrete business with revenues, costs, and how things are going to go forward. And that was very useful.
And probably I will build on that because we started with slides as well, and we are now in a very industrial mindset as well. And indeed, putting numbers, in our case, we are really simplifying a solution that exists. You can actually connect your building to the energy of the earth today, but this is pretty difficult. It takes a lot of footprint, a lot of room, so that means that this is a very, very niche market at the moment. And the idea is really to industrialize it. And so how to convince investors and raise funds. It's really about making it concrete, making it actionable, and show a roadmap as well. So you'll start with a point, and then with the vision of in 5 years, where will I be? And really make that roadmap into action, get the right resources, the right talents lined up for that. And in our case, there is, of course, an operational team, but there is also a R&D team, or at least R&D looks like it's going to happen in 20 years. No, it's not the case. You have to make it agile. So that doesn't work. But to provide even more insight in the technology industrialization roadmap, so that you'll be able to activate step after steps, another simplification, then open the market to other customers to make and raising the impact. 20% of the CO2 emissions globally come from heating those buildings. This is 20%. This is vastly overlooked at the moment. And by saying I would divide that by 10, and looking at there is 30,000 buildings in France every year that are being built or renovated or retrofitted by gas. Come on, you know, we're in 2021. Right, gas plus 60% in 1 year. How would you call that social housings while you're putting gas in it? I mean, it's just not. And you know, we are as individuals, as citizens, we can see that this is just not possible. This is not sustainable. But our customers, would that be social housings or people that own or build those housings or those offices and etc. They know they have to find solutions. They know they need to have alternatives. So they are actually craving for alternatives. And so that comes in your business models because actually there is no much renewables that are not intermittent, locally available, that you can access and leverage on. So that are the key factors to raise money and to have an impact at the end.
Yep. And same for you. I know you guys have raised your first round, I believe, your Series A. Or
Nothing else has been announced.
Okay. All right. Well, do you want to say something then? I'll leave that vague. Do you want to say something about the fundraising landscape and how you're approaching that right now?
Of course, yeah. The truth is that 2017 was year when climate change was not on the map of investors from the venture capital sphere. There's a lot of public money going into the topic already, but certainly not at the quantities that we see now. What happened, I think, I can comfortably say last year was that there was a massive interest, first of all, just in general at, again, the topic of renewables. This is kind of the second wave after the big crash of the solar a few years back. Then kind of it trickled down into other types of solutions. And this year, already, I think the carbon accounting space where we operate in, we've seen since the beginning of the year 150 companies only in Berlin and France, which is where we have offices, show up on the market, which is kind of a demonstration of how the market is heating up. In terms of funding, if I can say kind of the main obstacles we've seen and how this has changed now, definitely there was a period when there was a lot of education needed to explain to an investor what is this thing, carbon accounting, what is scope 1, 2, 3, why is my technology more superior than any other, because it goes down into the supply chain. It was not necessarily clear what was the competitive advantage there if they didn't understand the basics of the topic. The second one, which also you can see today, is kind of how deep you understand the fundamental problem that we're addressing. Climate change is not a problem of us not compensating enough and not offsetting enough. It's a problem of reducing emissions. And that's where you can see kind of the first layers of investment happen into some offsetting apps and so on, like these kinds of short-term solutions that don't necessarily look at the larger picture. And then today, I can, with a lot of actually hope, say that VCs are becoming a lot more informed about the topic of sustainability, but also understand what are the building blocks of the challenges related to the stakeholders you would be working with. So we work with large corporates. For them, it's about digitization. If you put on top of that sustainability, then it's kind of getting them to change and maybe implement solutions that are going to have to skip a few steps of digitization as well. So these kinds of things. So that's maybe an obstacle that has been overcome. What is still there is what I just mentioned, that is sometimes the fundamental challenge that is ahead of us is not understood. And that's essentially understanding the magnitude of climate change as a whole. We can't be thinking of climate change as one of those hype topics where we would be just, doing some innovation and then make up some money out of it and then hope for the best. It's actually about reestablishing the whole economic system that we have, which means that we need to think in a fundamentally different manner. This is where the biggest investment successes are going to happen. And this is where, if anyone from the audience is in the VC sphere, you should be putting your money into.
See, I heard those things and I just get depressed. So I have so much admiration that you heard this and you've been inspired to fight and do something about it.
It's not about fighting. It's more like pick what you want to see happening in the next few years. I think all of us here in the audience, at least, are hopeful that we see a society which is more equitable, more prepared for future challenges similar to the one that COVID is. And what this means is that we need to face these facts in a way that we're equipped for tomorrow, and it's nothing to do with us being like scared or, we're actually having the massive benefit of being super well informed, which is not the case with examples like COVID, for example.
And maybe just to add on that, what is it that we can do where some of us had the chance of having opportunity, ideas, funds, and etc. raise that, but at the end of the day, everyone, each of us has a choice, and you have the choice to invest your money where it makes sense. You have the choice to work in a company that makes sense. You have the choice. You have the choice, and the reason why I believe we are here is because we actually had only one choice: is to make something. In our case, this is funding a company, but I'm sure we do lots of other things apart from that. But wow, this is a choice.
Yeah. And I do hear more and more from VCs that, and corporations, that they're hearing from the ground up that their customers or their partners are demanding transparency around these things, around their impact, climate, social, diversity, things like that. They want to know, where does my food come from? If I'm buying your product off the shelf, what am I doing to the planet? I mean, it seems, but it's always hard for me to know, is that a real dynamic or is that sort of a little bit of...
This is a real dynamic. So you have companies that would connect their buildings to the earth, divide by 10 their emissions because they want it, because they have internal, mindset and engagement for that. But you also have companies that report to their financial, they have they want to be attractive to their own investors. And when they raise money, this money is conditional to the CO2 reduction. And more you can see that. So there is an individual mindset, right, of I want to do something good, but there is also a business impact on their own business. If I want to raise my money, well, I'd better have a good ESG CO2 report at the end of the day.
Okay, let me ask a quick question. We're running out of time here, but we have one, and this might be for you, about some of the key indicators that can be used to to quantify the impact on climate. I mean, this kind of goes to what you're doing.
So, for the benefit of kind of bringing us all on the same page in terms of some key definitions, I'd love to explain what is the GHG protocol. So this is the framework by which essentially emissions get to be calculated. And this is something that has been internationally established and well accepted for how we calculate emissions across different industries. The emissions are divided in 3 layers. So there's scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is your vehicles and facilities. Scope 2 is purchase services like heating, cooling. And then scope 3 is your suppliers. So this could be purchased goods and services like servers. If you're producing physical products like, let's say, a car, that would be the little bits and bobs that build up the car. But then it's also the commuting, the traveling of your employees, as well as investments. So you can understand the complexity of this. A crash course into the changes in the regulatory framework at the moment are that essentially historically there would be only like the scope 1 and 2 that would be looked at. So a bank wouldn't even consider its investments, which is pretty, mind-blowing given this is the main part of their job. And then essentially what now is happening is that we're moving into this layer of scope 3. For all of these different elements, there's different data points you can take. And this could be, the money you've put into something. It could be the amount of electricity used in kilowatts. It could be the kilometers that your employees have traveled and so on. All of these data points are essentially building up your emissions. And if you really want to make this elaborate and go into other types of topics that are not necessarily covered by regulation, we're talking about water, we're talking about soil health. This is, for example, for fashion companies, this is super important. And essentially, these are probably kind of the basics you can cover if you're probably kind of a larger company, because this is where the regulatory framework also pushes you to be. Other than that, like just getting a fundamental understanding of your scope 1, 2, and 3 is a good approach to get efficiency in your strategy, as far as I can see the question from here.
Yeah, and I think that's all we have time for, yes? Okay, Delphine's giving me the nod. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today, and thank you again for joining us here at Station F, and please, can we have a round of applause for our guests?
Actually,
Thank you.
And I would like to welcome Roxanne back onto the stage.